Okay, fellas, little progress report here. I've got the brass gearboxes installed, but so far I've only got 2 screws in each box. I've got one down in here, and I've got one right in front of the motor. The holes on the plate do line up. There was a little tweaking involved. I had to remove a little material from the corner point here. I've got very close clearance for this gear, but I checked it and it's got at least 5 thou, so it should be good. I intend to mark and then I'll remove and drill and tap to put screws here, and I'd like to try and get one somewhere around the back, possibly in here. Now, as long as we're talking about screws, I may have mentioned this before. Me and fasteners have had a very, very long relationship. All kind of screws, nuts, bolts, socket head, cap screws, taps, drills, blah, 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 blah. So I've picked up a lot of good tips, and here's a couple of them for you now about these tanks, about the Phillips head screws that they use. I've got several different small screwdrivers, tons of them. One of my favorites is an old, wore-out Craftsman because it's got a nice rounded tip on it. Now, when you go to put these screws in, you're going to find yourself in all kinds of crazy angles and trying to hold screws up with the screwdriver in ways that it's not meant to do, and there's a couple of good tips for that. One of those is these stuff. Now, this is just regular axle grease. This happens to be red, but it's usually like black or that kind of putrid yellow color, and I like to get just a tiny little bit on the end of my screwdriver. I get just a tiny little bit on there. You don't need very much at all. And what that does for you, hard to do this without the camera on the tripod. You can stick the screw in the end of the, or the screwdriver in the end of the screw with that grease on it, and it'll hold that screw in position for you. Okay? You can also use it to kind of tilt it, and with the rounded head on this screwdriver, I can have the screw up and down and still be at an angle and turn it a little bit. You just got to be really light and delicate. Another thing that works good for stubborn screws on the tip of your screwdriver, which, by the way, you always want to keep it nice and clean when you don't have the grease on it. But another good thing is Comet or Ajax. If you dip the tip of your screwdriver in Comet or Ajax, it will give it grip. You know, the little granules. Now then, afterwards, you got to keep a good supply of Q-tips laying around to clean that stuff out when you get done, the grease and whatnot. But anyway, that's a little progress report on where we're at. I've got the road wheels are all installed. You can see once I got the holes lined up, the axle, it's pretty well centered in the housings. Okay, now I did have to make a couple other small modifications to get this stuff in. There's a couple of screws right here that I actually had to take my Dremel and reduce the size of the head to get clearance. You got it's really, really tight along the sides. So there's one is the head of a screw, and the other is the end of the screw and the nut. You have to actually remove material. When I have these back out for drilling and tapping, I'll make sure and get you a good view of that. There's the nut, center screen right there, down inside that gap. And the screw is underneath the head of that brass rod that runs back and forth between the walls of the boxes. Both of those needed modification, as well as the tip of the gearbox right here had to have a little material removed. They've even got a small divot in the front piece on here just for the rotation of that last gear. I'll get you another good shot of that when I have it out for tap too. So that's an update on the new Jagdpanther hull. I think that pretty much covers most of it. Oh yeah, on the road wheels you got to be very careful to check inside and clean them out because they didn't deburr them after they drilled and tapped for the set screw that holds them in place. So be careful with that. Also, this is kind of by the way, but this whole unit on this tank is nowhere near as good as the one that's on my Hang Long. So I'm not sure yet what to do about that. I was considering maybe using this entire back plate, but I don't know. That's a decision we still haven't made because it would involve, there's the hole for the charging port right there. See, the charging port is already in place, which is kind of cool. You can see the wiring for it going in right there. So if I change the back, I got to do that too, but we'll think about it. So right now I'm going to get on getting the battery plate all installed. I'm going to pull this out, and then I'll run the screws in it very carefully one time first to kind of cut threads. And I think we've talked about that before too. When you go to put the screw into these plastic pieces, if you run the screwdriver backwards a little bit first, you'll be able to feel that screw drop down when the last thread clicks over, and then reverse and start running it in. Because you really don't want to cross thread this plastic, fellas. It'll only put up with that once or twice, and then you're going to be searching the internet for a hard to find part. Okay, as I say always, see you next time.